In today's video, we have all the latest NHL trade rumors heading to the deadline, especially regarding the New York Rangers. They're expected to make a significant move. What young players would they be willing to include in a package to make that happen? Plus, we have a look at the Maple Leafs offseason plan on a trade they might make this summer. Plus, we have a significant update on the Arizona Coyotes arena situation and playing with ASU and how that might all work. And we also have some news regarding some players that are out on the COVID protocol list and more. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to discuss here today. Of course, All-Star Weekend has come to an end. NHL players are returning back to their home base here today, many of which had practices. Not everybody was at practice. Some of them are still traveling. I know a couple of players that ended up on COVID protocol list. One was at the All-Star game, and that's Devils forward Jack Hughes. Another is Jesperi Kotkaniemi in Carolina. So clearly there's still a little bit of COVID going around, still some players getting positive tests here, but certainly it's cut down significantly. A lot of the other players that were at All-Star Weekend, they probably wouldn't be required to test because a big chunk of them have already had positive tests and have gone through this, and once that happens, you're not required to test anymore for 90 days with the new protocols in place. So it'll be interesting to see how this moves forward and how things are affected in the near future here with that, but a couple of players will be coming out of the All-Star break on the COVID protocol list. Speaking of Kotkaniemi, there is updates from Don Waddell in the Carolina Hurricanes. He recently did an interview with Pierre LeBrun talking about a few things here. One was Kotkaniemi and the fact that they would like to sign him longer term. I know they were, a lot of people were really critical of the offer sheet. The $6 million for Kotkaniemi was a fairly significant overpayment, but the plan there all along, I believe, which was kind of reported at the time, was that they kind of had a side agreement, like a handshake kind of agreement, for Kotkaniemi to sign longer term with the Carolina Hurricanes. After that was eligible and likely take a smaller amount. It was an overpayment to get the player, which is sometimes something you have to do. And if they're happy enough with them, it'll work out. I know in the beginning things started slow for Kotkaniemi, and a lot of people were still criticizing the move, saying it was a big overpayment, waste of time. But I think it's fair to say that he certainly played better into the second half of the first half of the season, if you will. Certainly at a point now where he's put up 20 points in 42 games. And while that's not exactly screaming $6 million contract, and a big star player, anything of that nature, it is progress. You got to keep in mind, last year in Montreal, it was a frustrating year for him even though the team had a lot of success and went deep in the playoffs. The regular season wasn't the greatest, and especially for him, where he only put up 20 points in 56 games. Of course, he wasn't even a regular in their playoff run as well, even getting him to be a healthy scratch in a few critical, important playoff games. So as we kind of thought going into the offseason, it was kind of a potential time for Kotkaniemi that he might be traded. We knew that was a possibility. Didn't end up getting dealt, but this offer sheet kind of surprised us a little bit in a way here. But needless to say, the Canes are happy with his development as of late. And even though he may not be a $6 million player, as I said, I don't know what it works out to be. Maybe it's 4.5, maybe it's 4.75. I'm not sure what the contract works out to, but the Canes are certainly very interested in helping him sign long term and keeping him in the fold. Not going to be easy to do though, given the fact that they do have a tight cap situation with a lot of the players they now have on board. They also need to sign Vincent Trochek, who's an upcoming UFA, and they are interested in retaining him here as well. Of course, the Canes are one of the top teams in the East, and are certainly, I think, fair to say, considered to be a cup contender, cup favorite amongst a few other handful of teams here. So we'll see what the season and the playoffs bring to them. But, obviously some developments there and some potential new contracts that we might see some more long-term deals in place for those Hurricanes. Now, when it comes to another update, just something I found a little bit different, a little bit weird. We had reported last few days or into late last week, some of the candidates being interviewed or likely being interviewed, or should say rumored to be interviewed by the Blackhawks for their vacant GM job. And it was reported that a couple of names that were out there were like Scott Mellanby, Peter Chiarelli, and I found the Hawks actually put out a Twitter post, and I'll show it to you here, confirming they had this news that they've interviewed Scott Mellanby for the vacant GM job. It's just I don't know, it's not really a big deal or anything like that. I just found it really odd. You never see teams publicly announcing who they've interviewed for certain jobs. Usually the team itself doesn't say much of anything publicly until they have somebody that they're hiring and are announcing the new person to their new job. So just found it weird why they felt the need to announce who was being interviewed, because really an interview isn't much. It might not lead to anything at all. So just, I don't guess, let me know what you think of that. Do you find it odd? Do you find it weird? I did. Just want to see what you thought down below. Now, speaking of another odd scenario, the Arizona Coyotes arena situation, which I know there might be a few people that disagree with that and don't think it's weird or what's going on down there, but I personally do, and I do have a lot of concerns that it's going to work out. I do have a lot of concerns that it's going to be even more profitable than the existing setup in Glendale at Gila River Arena, which is what Bettman actually kind of made us think on his comments, which I thought was really weird when he talked about it at All-Star Weekend. But there's a meeting coming up this Thursday, which should bring a lot of clarity here, because essentially ASU has to have a big addition to the existing arena that's being built here, because the arena itself apparently won't be ready until November, but that's for ASU to play games. The Coyotes won't be able to play games until December, and that's assuming that everything goes to plan. And we all know when there's big construction projects that there's never any delays, right? Like, that never happens. Construction is always on time. I'm obviously being very sarcastic. I deal a lot with construction and finance in my regular day-to-day job, so trust me, I have a lot of experience I can speak to from that, and it's rare that we see a big project actually be completed on time. It's almost always late, even if it's only a week or two or something fairly minor in some cases. When we're talking about a Coyotes team who needs to play 41 home games, that's a big deal. And we saw the New York Islanders start this season one right here, the new one that we're in right now, on the road, because their arena wasn't going to be ready at the start of the year. And they had a long road trip to start the season. That had a big impact on them as a team. They had a really slow start to the season, and even though they've played better as of late, still a bit inconsistent at times. So I'm not going to say that it's the only reason why their season's not going well. I don't think that's the case at all, but I think it might have had a factor early on. I think that's fair to say, being away from home for such long stretches. Now, of course, in their case, they were able to play a lot of games that weren't too far. So even though they were on the road, they were still able to return home often. There's so many teams in that, eastern area of the U.S. and the Northeast there in the New York area and some states that are close by. They can usually do a trip to the rink and then back. They don't necessarily have to be overnight. So it's not quite the same. But still, when you're not playing in your home arena, it does make a difference. Now, when it comes to this Coyotes plan, we know there's an addition that has to be built, which is why it would be later than the ASU section of the arena. So obviously they can't share like common areas, so they have to have their own dressing rooms, and there's other requirements that have to be met here. So the Coyotes are going to have to spend about $20 million out of their own pocket, which is supposed to be paid for by owner Alex Murillo, to have this addition built. And then from there, they can have home games, which they're estimating for 3 seasons. Now, we know that the arena is going to be a maximum of 5,000 fans, but with NHL upgrades to meet all their standards, it's probably going to be down to about 3,200. So it's really hard to wrap your head around the fact that how this could be profitable. I think the team is going to continue to bleed money. We know that Gary Bettman said from a revenue sharing standpoint, it's not going to make any difference because the Coyotes already get the maximum through that. So if they're already getting the maximum, and they still, as we've seen and well documented, that they could not pay their bills for several months. They were way behind on taxes. They were way behind on arena lease payments. They were way behind on all the other costs that comes with operating games. And I know that there's usually always a few Coyotes fans that have some nasty things to say to me when I talk about it. But those are the facts. The team could not pay its bills. So I'm not sure how you can defend that. So how they just have this magical amount of money to privately finance a huge project with like a new arena with an entertainment district really kind of is hard to comprehend. So that's why we get all the pushback here to believe it's going to come to fruition. Now, of course, keep in mind when teams like Winnipeg and Quebec lost their teams way back here, like the Jets were having a hard time keeping like 12,000 attendance. The Quebec team In Quebec City, they were not struggling anywhere near as long as the Coyotes when the plug was pulled on them. Different scenario as well. It wasn't all about attendance. Some of it had to do with the Canadian dollar. Really was really low, which inflated the cost because everything's done in US dollar. So if the Canadian dollar is worth a really low amount, let's say it's down to like 50, 55 cents US, that means that the Canadian owners are going to have that much more of a cost to be able to keep up. And it's, it's hard, right? It makes it really difficult, especially when they're not as big a markets and they're not as deep pocketed as like the Leafs or the Habs or the Rangers or the Bruins or those, original 6 teams have been around a long time and are really high valued, rich organizations. So it's still hard to wrap your head around how this can work, but still, we should know a lot more on Thursday if this part of it here gets accepted. I'm not sure if they're going to vote by the sounds of things, but if that part gets accepted, then they can move forward. But then I believe before they actually start anything on the Coyotes section, that the Coyotes want to have an approval from Tempe on their new arena build as well. So I think they kind of want to, because they need to make sure, and Bettman even said himself that as long as there's a commitment and a firm plan in place to build a new arena, that they would support the team and whatever they had to do on a temporary basis to get that new arena to basically to stay in the state and to survive. But if for some reason that Tempe bid doesn't go through, then I wonder what's going to happen here. I'm not sure what choice they're going to have. I would think that if they had to move, and I'm not suggesting they do at this point, but if they had to, they would have to go to somewhere, because there's no time at this point that has an arena that is already built, it's already ready, and they wouldn't need a lot of time to make NHL adjustments to make it to what their standards are. So we're looking at, like Kansas City does have an arena. It was opened in 2007. I know Houston might be able to be ready, but still Houston, I'm not sure there's an appetite there right now. I think there's a potential for location, but I don't know that there's really an owner. I'm not sure that Tillman Fertitta, we haven't really heard much on his side of it as far as really wanting to own a team. I've heard reports, which I haven't been able to confirm, but just the word on the street from some of the sources I follow say that he's not really interested in owning a team, that he might be willing to own the building or something. Like it's complicated. So I'm not sure. As much as I think Houston would be a great market, and I do see a team getting there eventually, I don't know that it could happen that fast. Of course, Quebec City's sitting and waiting as well, but I think that would rot Gary Bettman to move the team back to Quebec City, considering. But the other thing that would really cause an imbalance in the conferences, so I'm not sure that they'd be overly thrilled to do that anyways. Whatever happens, if the team ends up in a situation where they have to move, the NHL will do whatever it can to keep it in an area that still works for the Central Division, since they're now part of that. At least that's my belief. That'll be their first choice. Unless all options fail, I don't see the team going to Quebec. And until we get a little bit more details and kind of, a longer term outlook that's, a little bit more firm, I just have a hard time believing that this is going to work out and it's a good idea. It's received a lot of criticism from around the league, from different reports I've seen. A lot of NHL executives, they don't want to talk about it publicly, but I've heard reports of numerous executives having a lot of concerns over this and are not thrilled about it. But at the end of the day, it seems like Bettman and Daly are committed to making this work, and we'll see what happens. But we should know a lot more information on the Coyotes arena situation by the end of this week. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to some trade talk, I want to mainly want to look at the Leafs and the Rangers. And we know the Rangers are targeting multiple players. And when it comes to the Maple Leafs, they're also targeting a variety of options too. Now, the Maple Leafs, we've seen quotes from Kyle Dubas, which came from Luke Fox. Obviously, Kyle Dubas has made it known that he wants players with term. At least that's his preference. Of course, he also said that you can't always get what you want. Basically, that's not an exact quote. I'm paraphrasing here. But essentially, you don't always get your preference, and that you may not be able to do that. But if he can, he would rather acquire a player with term than a rental player. But to be honest, I think that's probably fair to say that most GMs would always prefer that. A hockey trade over a rental situation almost always is better, because you're giving up assets and you're only getting a short-lived bump out of it. But if it gets you a Stanley Cup, I guess you don't care as much. But it quite often doesn't work out that way. If we look back on NHL trade deadline history, there's just not a lot of common situations. Teams tend to make moves and go for it all the time. It's rare, because only one team can win the cup, that you see a big move at the deadline leading to a cup. It does happen. It has happened. But the odds are against it happening is what I'm kind of getting at here. So I'm not sure what the Leafs are going to do. I know they've really been targeting blue line help, which seems to be the main area that we're likely going to see. It's expected the Leafs are going to leave a few players like Nick Ritchie and Kyle Clifford probably in the minors for the second half of the year. Or at least it looks that way, or at least a big chunk of it. They try to accrue some cap space so they have more options. But like I mentioned, Josh Manson being a target of theirs, but we know that he has a no-move clause, or modified no-trade clause, which appears to be blocking the Leafs, but doesn't mean he won't agree to it. But the other thing with the Maple Leafs here as well that I want to explore is the Jake Muzzin. Now, I don't think Jake Muzzin is in any danger of being traded now. I don't want to be here seeing comments saying he's not going anywhere. No, the Leafs aren't going to trade Muzzin before the playoffs. And the answer is no, I don't think they're going to. I'd be shocked if that happened. However, I want to look at an article from Jonas Seigel of The Athletic exploring what the Leafs might do in the offseason. And he goes on to show that with the emergence of Rasmus Sandin and his underlying defensive numbers being so drastically improved, plus we know he can be a good offensive player as well, even though he plays a different style of game than Muzzin, he might kind of make Muzzin expendable when it comes to the salary cap as well. You keep in mind, Sandin needs a new contract. And that's not going to be super expensive, but it's not going to be super cheap either. So he needs to be getting a good bump in pay. You get Jack Campbell, who's going to need a big bump in pay. So that's going to make things complicated. There's going to be one or two players that are going to have to get moved out for cap purposes only. This is going to be the nature of how things work in Toronto, as long as they continue to roll with so much payroll invested in their top four forwards and guys like Morgan Riley on the blue line. So it's clearly those guys get the job done. We won't see a breakup of the big players. It's going to be the supporting cast that continuously gets kind of shuffled to make numbers work. So when it comes to Jake Muzzin in the offseason, obviously he's making like over $5.5 million. If they moved Jake Muzzin, they could consider, a much cheaper alternative in a guy like Sandin. They could also maybe acquire another defenseman to play a more physical style that makes less money. So that's kind of the argument there. They're not saying that Sandin's going to be Jake Muzzin 2.0. He's not that kind of defenseman. But he is steadily improved in earning himself a much more bigger opportunity, bigger role with the team, in that he could kind of, cover you defensively more than you thought he could in his earlier, beginning days of the NHL. Now that he's near the end of his entry-level contract, he's learned to adapt, and the defensive stats are much stronger, which could kind of force a tough decision with the Maple Leafs organization when it comes to their blue line. Of course, we'll see what they do with the deadline, and if they do acquire somebody with term like Dubas wants, that might change things as well. We also got guys like Dermott and Hall that are questionable what their future holds with this team. They could be used as deadline trade bait, if you will. I'm not sure if they will. There's also been some talk that some prospects like Robertson or Amirov could be used. They do have a couple of draft picks left for 2022 as well. Dubas has made it known that they only have 3 picks for that draft, and they don't really want to move them. But if they feel like they have the right deal to really push them forward, they'll consider anything. So when we get to the offseason and the Leafs have to make some tough choices when it comes to their salary cap management, do you see a possibility of Jake Muzzin maybe being a cap casualty and maybe being traded this summer? Now, of course, as we know, the Rangers are also having a phenomenal season and are expected to make a significant addition at the deadline. They've had their eye on a variety of players, including guys like JT Miller and Claude Giroux, and it's been known here for some time that they're willing to do something significant. Numerous NHL insiders have been reporting this. The focus has been mostly on a top 6 forward, maybe a depth defenseman, and it's been a little bit more of a conversation now with some reports emerging on what pieces they might be willing to move to make that happen. Now, we know for a fact, based on things that have been made public, that Vitaly Kravtsov would like a trade and a fresh start somewhere else, so he's certainly in the mix. We know that there's always a possibility of using their draft picks like a first rounder. Considering they're having such a strong year, it would be a low pick in the first round and a not overly great draft, so I don't see any reason why they wouldn't consider using that as well. They have a lot of prospect defensemen, which unfortunately are not all going to be able to play for the New York Rangers. Looking at their existing guys that kind of make up their top 4 between Adam Fox, Jacob Trouba, Ryan Lindgren, and K'Andre Miller. Obviously, Trouba and Fox are both signed long-term big money deals. Miller and Lindgren round out that top 4 nicely. They're not obviously making as much money at this point, but could certainly get raises in the future. So you only have a couple of spots left for some of these younger players. They have Zach Jones, they have Nils Lundqvist, they have Braden Schneider, they even have Matthew Robertson on the way as well. And of course, don't forget Libor Hayek, who's had a kind of an up and down season here as well. Right now, we also have Patrick Nemeth that's on the roster too. So they certainly have a lot of options there, but obviously Nemeth is an older player, probably won't have a long tenure with the Rangers organization. Now, at one point, Nils Lundqvist was kind of considered an untouchable prospect in the organization, but now that we've had a chance to see other players like especially Braden Schneider, the Rangers are so happy with Schneider's development and play that maybe Lundqvist might be the guy they're willing to trade if they have to get something significant done at the deadline. Now, I'll caution you that I think this is less likely than a first-round pick in Vitaly Kravtsov, but it depends on who they decide to go after here at the deadline and what the cost of it is going to be. I'm not sure that Chris Drury is going to want to obviously move much from that blue line, but if you factor in what I just said about their top four, and they have four solid more prospect D on their way up, they can't all play for the New York Rangers, so you might as well find ways to improve the other areas of the team and kind of make a push towards the Stanley Cup with what you have as good trade currency, in my opinion. But a recent article from the New York Post suggesting that Lundqvist might be that guy that they're willing to move. It certainly makes things interesting when you consider a package of Lundqvist, Kravtsov, and a first rounder, or even if it's not Lundqvist and it turns out to be Jones or Schneider, which I would be surprised if it's Schneider at this point. That's still a pretty enticing package when you're talking about making an acquisition like a JT Miller if you're the Vancouver Canucks. I know they might ask for a Kakko or a Lafreniere, but I'm not sure that the Rangers are willing to go there right now. Plus, you also have teams like the Philadelphia Flyers, who could certainly use a mixture of forwards and D. That's a good package for Claude Giroux. I'm not sure what the asking price will be for the Flyers captain, but I think it's more than enough to get the job done, in my opinion. Now, of course, with the possibility of some of these guys coming in cap space, they might need a third team to be involved to retain some salary. That could get complicated and could push the cost up, as that third team would have to receive something as well. But anyways, the whole point of this is not to discount the Rangers and what prospects they have. They probably have one of the best shots and one of the best prospect pools to draw from here to get a significant move done, land one of these big time players, and really have an excellent shot at making a Stanley Cup run. So let me know your thoughts on everything discussed here today down in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to this channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news, rumors, and analysis from all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.